Football ain't just about the hard knocks and the highlight reels, folks. Some of the meanest scraps these boys faced were wars nobody could even see. Take Trent Williams, a big ol' hoss fighting a rare cancer in the dark. He had to look folks in the eye and say, "It was cancer. I had cancer." Talking about cutting a tumor right out of his skull. Then you got Aaron Hernandez, whose mind was getting chewed up by that CTE. Hernandez was a star once, but he was suffering from a brain rot so bad it's hard to fathom. These boys, their biggest brawls didn't happen on the grass. Trent Williams. Now, Trent Williams is a superstar, sure enough, but his toughest battle wasn't against no pass rusher. It was against a silent killer he never saw coming. Between the lines, folks reckon Williams is just about the best offensive tackle to ever lace up a pair of cleats in his time. A pure force of nature, made the Pro Bowl more times than I can count. The rock that holds the whole line together. But behind the curtain, Williams was walking around with a ticking time bomb, a rare, life-threatening cancer, and didn't even know it. The whole mess started whisper quiet back in 2013. He was with Washington then, found him a little knot on his scalp. Team doctors? They brushed it off like dust on a boot, told him it wasn't nothing to lose sleep over. Being the trusting sort, Williams kept on playing like a beast. He had no clue that lump was slowly turning into a monster. Years rolled by, and that knot got bigger. By 2019, it was sticking out like a sore thumb. He finally went to see a real specialist and got the hard truth. Dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, that's a mouthful for a rare skin cancer, scared him straight, I tell you what. Docs told him that cancer was sitting dangerously close to his skull, said if he didn't act fast, it'd burrow right into his brain. What really burned was, knowing that thing had been festering there for years unchecked. Williams said they told him to get his affairs in order. Imagine that having to look the Reaper in the eye for the first time in your life. He went under the knife to cut that tumor out. Scary stuff, but that surgery saved his hide. He spent the whole 2019 season on the shelf, and his faith in the Washington front office was shattered into a million pieces. Felt stabbed in the back by the folks supposed to protect him. He dug his heels in, refused to return, and demanded a ticket out of town. Come 2020, they shipped him off to the San Francisco 49ers, gave him a clean slate, on and off the field. Since then, shoot, he ain't just come back to football, he's been tearing it up, proved he's still the king of the left tackles, grabbed more all-pro nods, and led his boys on a hunt for that Super Bowl ring. Aaron Hernandez. Now, Aaron Hernandez. That's a story dark enough to chill your bones. A deadly disease hiding in plain sight until the clock ran out. On the gridiron, Hernandez looked like the next big thing. A Florida Gator standout who could catch anything thrown his way. First-team All-American, national champ boy had it all before the Patriots snatched him up in 2010. Just 20 years old and already a lethal weapon for New England. Him and Gronkowski were a two-headed monster, dragged that team to Super Bowl 46. To the folks in the stands, the sky was the limit for that kid. But underneath the glory, Hernandez was fighting a demon nobody could see, a sickness that wouldn't show its face till he was gone. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Folks round here just call it CTE. It's a brain disease that eats you away, caused by getting your bell rung over and over. Hernandez had been taking hits since he was a pup. Thing is, unlike a broken leg or the flu, you can't spot CTE while a man's still breathing. It changes a man, makes him forgetful, depressed, angry, turns him impulsive, makes his emotions go haywire. After he passed in prison back in 2017, only 27 years old, they looked at his brain at Boston University. What they found rattled him. Hernandez had stage 3, CTE. That's about as bad as it gets. Experts said they'd never seen a brain that tore up in a kid so young. Looked like the mind of an old man who'd been battered for decades. The parts of his brain that handled judgment and keeping your cool, they were shot to pieces. His kin filed a lawsuit against the NFL later on, claiming the league didn't do right by him. Said they didn't warn the boys enough about what all those hits do to a man's head. Then there's Steve Gleason. Steve Gleason's another one who faced a battle that makes a 4th and goal look easy. A disease that flipped his world upside down. Saints fans remember him as a hero, a gritty safety, and a special teams wildman. That blocked punt in 2006? That wasn't just a play. It was a beacon of hope for a city trying to dry out after Hurricane Katrina. That one moment carved his name in stone down in the Big Easy. but his biggest mark was fixin' to be made long after he hung up the cleats. Gleason gave 8 hard years to the league, mostly with the Saints, before he called it quits in 2008. Once the final whistle blew on his ball-playing days, he reckoned it was time to settle down, chase some business ventures, and build a sweet life with his missus, Michelle. Everything looked to be coming up roses until 2011, when a storm cloud the size of Texas rolled in with some heartbreaking news. The man was barely 34 years young when the doctors told him he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, though most folks round here know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. Now, that ALS is a wicked beast. It's a sickness that slowly shuts down your muscles, trapping you inside your own body while your mind stays sharp as a tack. Day by day, it steals a man's power to walk, talk, eat a square meal, and eventually, it takes the very breath from his lungs. And the hard truth is, doctors ain't got no cure for it yet. For Gleason, that diagnosis meant staring down a road of body failure, a fate scarier than any linebacker he ever squared up against on the gridiron. But instead of folding like a cheap tent, Gleason dug his heels in. As that disease started chipping away at him, he poured his heart into spreading the word and lifting up others walking that same dark path. He went and started Team Gleason, a nonprofit outfit aimed squarely at making life a little brighter for folks with ALS by getting them the tech they need and fighting their battles in the public eye. Even as his body quit on him, Gleason got savvy with newfangled gadgets like eye-tracking gear, letting him keep speaking his mind and sharing his fire with the whole world. They captured his whole saga in that 2016 film, simply called Gleason, showing the raw, gritty truth of living with that sickness while getting ready to be a daddy. His grit didn't go unnoticed neither, as he was later honored with a Congressional Gold Medal and the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. Now, let's talk about Phillip Adams. Phillip Adams is one of them football players whose toughest scrap wasn't with some receiver downfield, but with a brain disease that was haunting him like a ghost long after he hung up his cleats. To the naked eye, Adams's time in the league looked like a lot of other fellas trying to make a living playing ball. He was a blue-collar defensive back, scratching and clawing just to keep his name on the roster at the top level. Picked up in the 7th round back in 2010, Adams suited up for 6 different squads, including the 49ers, Patriots, Seahawks, Raiders, Jets, and the Falcons. He might not have been a superstar, but he carved out a decent run by soaking up the punishment that comes with years of smash-mouth football. But what nobody reckoned at the time was that Adams's brain was slowly coming apart at the seams. Come April 2021, the whole football world got rocked when Adams went on a terrible tear in Rock Hill, South Carolina, ending lives before turning the gun on himself the very next day. The boy was only 32 years old. In the wake of that tragedy, his kinfolk decided to donate his brain to science, desperate to understand how a man with no rap sheet could do something so horrific. When the coroner took a look, the truth was uglier than sin. They found out after he passed that Adams was riddled with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or what we call CTE. The docs discovered Adams had an unusually bad case of stage 2C, TE, with heavy damage to his frontal lobes. That's the part of the brain that keeps a man's judgment and temper in check. Those researchers said the rot inside his head was way out of line for a young buck his age, fitting right in with the paranoia, rage, forgetfulness, and wild behavior he'd been showing. His family later let on that Adams had been wrestling with demons for years. He'd been belly-aching about terrible pain, forgetting things, tossing and turning at night, and acting like a completely different stranger. His daddy didn't mince words, wondering out loud if football had scrambled his boy's egg, pointing to all them hits Adams took over the years. Now, consider Jovan Belcher. Jovan Belcher is another one of them sad tales where the enemy wasn't across the line of scrimmage, but a silent killer wrecking his mind from the inside out. When he was on the grass, Belcher was known as a tough-as-nails defender who earned his keep with pure grit and gumption. Even though he went undrafted out of the University of Maine, he signed on with the Kansas City Chiefs and fought his way into a starting spot at inside linebacker. By the 2011 season, Belcher was a rock on that defense, piling up tackles and securing himself a fat new contract before the 2012 season kicked off. To his teammates and coaches, he looked to be a straight-shooting pro, building himself a solid life in the NFL. But underneath, nobody knew Belcher was likely dealing with some serious wiring issues upstairs. In December 2012, folks were left speechless when Belcher was part of a heartbreaking murder-suicide that cut his life short at just 25 years of age. Months later, his family had his brain looked at, praying for some answers. Sure enough, the autopsy showed Belcher had that same chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The brain doctors found clumps of abnormal protein scattered all through key parts of Belcher's mind, specifically the spots that handle memory, mood, and keeping your impulses on a leash. The experts reckoned that damage came from years of banging heads over and over again on the football field. Lawsuits started flying soon after, and the league found itself in hot water, pressured to face up to the long-term dangers of the game. Old Kenny Stabler. Now, Kenny the Snake Stabler is one of them football legends who faced his meanest opponent not on the gridiron against some blitzing linebacker, but against a sickness that trailed him long after he hung up his cleats. Quarterbacking for the Oakland Raiders back in the day, he was the heart and soul of that team, tough as boot leather, creative as a fox, and cool as a cucumber when the heat was on. The man took home the MVP trophy in 1974, made the Pro Bowl 4 times, and steered the Raiders to their very first Super Bowl ring like a seasoned captain. To the folks in the stands, Stabler looked harder to break than a cast-iron skillet, a leader who didn't just survive the storm, he danced in it. But behind the curtain, the bill was coming due. Come February of 2015, doctors hit him with the hard news: advanced colon cancer. By the time they caught it, that sickness was already at stage 4, leaving him with precious few cards left to play. Barely 5 months down the road, on July 8, 2015, Stabler took his last breath at 69 years young. It hit the football world like a bolt of lightning, marking the end for one of the finest gunslingers to ever grace the field. But what came out after the funeral shed light on a truth far darker and more unsettling than anyone reckoned. Just like he wanted, they sent his brain up to Boston University for studying, and the results were enough to make your hair stand on end. The docs pinned it down as Stage 3 Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy, or CTE. They found damage spread all across his mind like a wildfire, proving that trouble had been brewing in there for years. In his twilight years, the man suffered through lost memories, confusion, splitting headaches, a ringing in his ears that wouldn't quit, and some heavy emotional burdens. His inner circle reckoned he knew the game had taken its pound of flesh, and he wanted the truth out there to look out for the young bucks coming up next. Now, his case was a mighty big deal because folks used to think quarterbacks were sitting pretty safe from that kind of brain trouble. Today, Stabler ain't just a Hall of Famer. He's a stark reminder that the roughest fights don't stop when the whistle blows. Now, let's talk about Dwight Clark. Dwight Clark was the kind of legend who gave millions of fans a memory so sweet it still tastes like victory. But his biggest scrap happened long after the stadium lights dimmed, facing a killer he couldn't outrun. Back in the day, he was the bedrock of that San Francisco 49ers dynasty. With hands like glue, he turned that franchise around and played a massive part in bringing home 2 Super Bowl trophies. He etched his name in stone on January 10, 1982. When he climbed the ladder to snag Joe Montana's touchdown pass against the Cowboys, a moment folks simply call the catch. That one play didn't just change the game, it turned Clark into a bona fide football god. But years after he hung up the pads, life dealt him a hand nobody wants to play. Along about late 2016, he started feeling weak in the muscles and couldn't quite move right. Come March of 2017, Clark shared the heartbreaking news. He had ALS, what most folks know as Lou Gehrig's disease. Clark had a sneaking suspicion his time on the gridiron might have had something to do with it. He took plenty of knocks to the noggin back in the day, and he openly wondered if all that head trauma laid the groundwork for his illness. Instead of hiding away on the ranch, Clark decided to look that disease square in the eye with dignity and grace. He used his voice to shine a light on ALS and pushed the NFL to do right by the players, especially when it came to protecting their heads. As the sickness took hold, he went downhill faster than a runaway wagon. He ended up in a wheelchair, needing round-the-clock help, but he was surrounded by love from his old teammates and the faithful. Clark went to his reward on June 4, 2018, at 61 years old, after fighting like a lion for just over a year. Brian Braman. Now, Brian Braman is the kind of fella who built his name on grit, guts, and doing the dirty work that makes other players flinch. He wasn't some show pony out there, but he was exactly the kind of workhorse that coaches and teammates would ride or die for. A linebacker who wouldn't quit, and a special teams demon who played like his hair was on fire. Nobody picked him in the draft of 2011, but he clawed his way onto the Houston Texans and won the fans over with his relentless hustle. He went on to snag a Super Bowl ring with the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl 52, cementing his spot as a grinder who earned every inch the hard way. But after the cheering stopped, Brahman walked into a fight scarier than any Sunday showdown. Early in 2025, he got hit with news of a rare and mean brain cancer. What made it a real kick in the teeth was just how fast that sickness moved. Brahman didn't waste a second before launching an all-out war on the disease. He went through surgeries, chemo, and even that newfangled T-cell therapy, trying to get his own body to hunt down the cancer. At the start, we had a sliver of daylight. That treatment looked to be doing the trick, shrinking that tumor down some, but that cancer was a stubborn beast. It learned how to fight back and came on stronger, spreading faster than a brush fire in a drought. Them harsh treatments just stripped his defenses bare, leaving his immune system in tatters, making the road to recovery a mighty steep hill to climb and taking every ounce of strength his body had left. When the doctor bills started stacking up to the ceiling and Brahman needed looking after day and night, folks started a collection pot online to help keep a roof over his kinfolks' heads. Let me tell you, the whole football family came out of the woodwork in a big way. Old buddies from the locker room, coaches, and fans all stood tall right beside him, pitching in tens of thousands of dollars to ease the burden. Even J.J. Watt, one of Brahman's old brothers from the Texans days, dropped $10,000 in the hat personally, while a whole mess of folks sent their prayers and love. Through the whole ordeal, Brahman dug his heels in and didn't waver, drawing grit from his two little girls and refusing to throw in the towel even when things got mighty dark. On July 16, 2025, Brian Brahman went on to glory at just 38 years young. Now, Junior Seau is known far and wide as one of the greatest linebackers to ever strap on a helmet. But let me tell you, the scariest demon he ever had to wrestle wasn't waiting for him between the hash marks. It was a silent killer in his brain that nobody caught wind of until he was already gone. Seau played 20 long seasons in the league, spending 13 years lighting it up for the San Diego Chargers before taking his talents to the Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots. The man was a legend 6 times. They named him a first-team All-Pro, a 12-time Pro Bowler, and a member of the All-Decade team for the 90s. He was famous for hitting like a runaway freight train, having a motor that never quit, and simply refusing to come off that grass. Seau built himself a name as a true warrior, the kind of fella who'd grit his teeth and play through the hurt every single Sunday. What nobody reckoned with back then was the heavy price his brain was paying for all them collisions. Once he finally hung up his cleats, Seau started battling sleepless nights, pulling away from folks and sinking into a deep, dark sadness. His ex-wife, Gina, said the poor man spent at least the last 7 years of his life tossing and turning, relying on prescription sleeping pills just to catch a few winks. She came out later and said that while no doctor ever officially wrote down concussion, he was always complaining about his head hurting, but he'd just shake the cobwebs out and get right back in the mix. In May of 2012, Seau met his tragic end at the age of 43. He didn't leave no goodbye letter, but right before he passed, he sent one last text to his babies and his ex-wife to let them know he loved them. After the dust settled, his family decided to donate his brain to the National Institutes of Health so the doctors could take a look. Months later, in January 2013, the results came back. Seau had undeniable signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. The researchers saw changes deep in his brain cells that matched CTE, a nasty condition tied to depression, acting without thinking, losing your memory, and thoughts of ending it all. Every independent brain doctor that looked at the tissue came to the exact same conclusion. That diagnosis finally shed some light on why he had been spiraling downward in those final years. His story became one of the biggest, saddest examples of CTE regarding our former football heroes. After finding that out, Seau's family took the NFL to court, arguing that the players were never told the honest truth about the dangers of getting their bells rung over and over. That lawsuit was eventually settled quietly in 2018. Now, let's talk about Kevin Turner. Kevin Turner is another one of them ball players whose toughest scrap didn't happen on the gridiron, but right inside his own skin. When he was playing, Turner was a gritty fullback who gave it his all for 8 seasons with the New England Patriots and the Philadelphia Eagles. Before the pros, he was a star for the Crimson Tide down at Alabama, helping bring home the national championship trophy in 1992, and making a living out of knocking heads, blocking for others, and taking a pounding at one of the most punishing spots on the field. But nobody reckoned at the time that all them hits to the helmet were planting the seeds of a deadly sickness that would send him to an early grave. In June of 2010, Turner got the heartbreaking news that he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, what folks often call Lou Gehrig's disease. As his body started failing him, Turner agreed to leave his brain and spinal cord to science, believing in his gut that football had something to do with his sickness. He stepped up as a lead plaintiff in that concussion lawsuit against the league, using his own struggles to fight for honesty and to look out for the next generation. Turner didn't hide his battle with ALS. He lived it out in the open for all to see. He showed up with his kids in a music video called Journey On by Ty Herndon and worked with HBO on a documentary called American Man, showing his daily grind and his mission to protect future players. He showed up with his kids in a music video called Journey On by Ty Herndon and worked with HBO on a documentary called American Man, showing his daily grind and his mission to protect future players. When his body started shutting down on him, Turner kept speaking his mind, starting the Kevin Turner Foundation to shine a light on the link between brain trauma and ALS. Kevin Turner was called home on March 24, 2016, at just 46 years old. Later that same year, the folks up at the Boston University CTE Center revealed that Turner had a mighty severe case of that brain disease. The brain doctors concluded that while ALS was his official cause of death, the breakdown of his nerves was sparked by the CTE he got from years of banging heads on the football field. Gather round, folks, because I gotta tell you the story of Dave Duerson. He was a titan on the gridiron, but his scariest scrap wasn't against no wide receiver or running back, it was against a silent killer eating away at his brain. When he was out on that field, let me tell you, Duerson was a straight-up hoss at safety, a driving force behind that legendary 1985 Chicago Bears defense. The man was a 4-time Pro Bowler, faster than a scalded dog and sharper than a tack. He hung his hat with the New York Giants and the Phoenix Cardinals too, walking away with 2 Super Bowl rings after 11 hard-fought years in the league. But behind all them glory days and trophies, Duerson's noggin was taking a serious pounding. And sadly, those heavy hits were writing a check that would eventually cost him his life. After he hung up his cleats in 1993, he tried his hand at business, running some McDonald's joints and a food company, but nothing could fix the damage that game had done to his mind. At just 50 years young, he decided to leave this world on his own terms with a shot to the chest, a deliberate move to save his head for the docks. He sent one last text to his kinfolk asking him to donate his brain to science, hoping to help folks understand just how bad football trauma really is. Well, the experts up at Boston University took a look and confirmed the heartbreaking truth. Dave was suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy. His poor brain was riddled with CTE, showing severe damage to the parts that handle your memory, your temper, and your judgment. We reckon you've got some thoughts on this tragedy, so go on and holler at us in the comments section below. And before you hit the dusty trail, smash that like button and subscribe to NFL Facts so you don't miss the next yarn we spin.